Welcome to Whachacha's Tabletop World, a channel devoted to the love of board gaming. My name is Sweetness Whachacha, and today we're looking at how to get into playing Lord of the Rings the card game in 2024. Now, my aim in this video is to help you to understand how to get into the game and to clear up some of the mystery around that in 2024. Now, there's a lot of product available for the game, and there's a lot of out-of-print product, and there's a lot of duplicated product. So it's going to be difficult to understand that, and my aim is to help you to understand how to, just purchase the game so that you can enjoy playing the game. Now, I'm not going to go into a tutorial. I'm not going to explain how you play the game. I'm just going to give you a couple quick basics. Number one, the game was a living card game, which means on a regular schedule, roughly once a month, you would get some kind of new content for the game. You'd get a new quest, which is sort of like a scenario to play against, and you get some new player cards that you could use to play against, either that scenario or any of the others in your collection. Now, I said was a living card game because the game is done with its design. It's not being worked on at the moment from Fantasy Flight Games, but they are doing some reprints, and I'll get into that in a little while. So essentially, it's a pre-constructed deck. You're going to build a deck outside of the game, and then when you have your deck, you're going to take your deck and your heroes, and you're going to go against whatever quest that you've selected. Okay, so if you don't like to build a deck, this game might not be for you, but let's not get into that. So what do you buy? Okay, so beyond the core set, which is I would say that's the first place to start. Of course, you buy the core set. You're going to get some tokens and things in there that you're going to need to play all of the quests, and you could argue that it's not really worthwhile to buy that. You could buy other product because you don't really need the tokens and things. You could, use something else. But there's a lot of bang for your buck here. Generally, these core sets have a lot of extra characters, a lot of extra cards, a lot of extra things to really kind of jumpstart your collection. And it's a very good buy for that. But beyond that, where do you go? Well, in order to understand where the game is at in 2024, we have to look at the release cycle and how the game was released prior to 2024. It's essential to understand that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now. So the game was released in 4 different ways. Number 1 is the main line, which are cycles. Number 2 are nightmare decks. Number 3 are the saga expansions. And number 4 are the standalone quests. And we're going to take a look at each of these in turn. Each cycle is comprised of 2 types of products. Number 1 would be the deluxe box. The deluxe box has 3 quests, 2 heroes, and a pile of player cards. The adventure packs each have 1 quest and 1 hero, as well as some player cards. Now, you cannot play any of the adventure packs in that cycle without the deluxe. The deluxe contains cards which have to be used to complete those scenarios. So you need both of those products to play in each single adventure pack. Now, you can play them in any order. They do follow a loose story, but you don't have to. You can play them out of order or out of sequence if you like. It doesn't really matter. The story, as I say, is pretty loose. Now, the second way, and possibly the most popular way the game was released, are the saga expansions. And these expansions follow exactly the events of the books and films. Now, each of the books have been divided into 2 saga expansions. So The Hobbit has 2, Fellowship of the Ring has 2, the Two Towers has 2, and The Return of the King has 2. Now, The Hobbit, each of them follows the same format as a normal deluxe, which means 3 scenarios or 3 quests, as well as player cards and 2 heroes. The Hobbit boxes tend to skew that a little bit. They have some extra heroes in there, but that's generally the way it's set up. Now, the other thing is that these are playable singly. You can play them just like you would any of the other content. You can play them as one-offs, but you can also take the entire series and play one long campaign going through the events of The Lord of the Rings. You can also play a smaller campaign with just the Hobbit boxes and play those 6 scenarios. So that's 2 ways to do it. So they will be persistent. You'll have things that happen, heroes that die you can't use, benefits and boons and things like that. So it's a very epic kind of way to play it. And I think a very relatable way, since people can, they're used to the films and the books, very popular, and you can follow those events exactly. And I should also mention that the player cards are the same between whether you're playing the normal main game of Cycle of Quests or if you're playing the Saga. You can mix and match, the same exact cards. So you don't have to only play some cards with Saga. So if you buy some of each of these products, you'll still be able to enjoy the game in the same way. Now let's look at the third way the game was released, and that's standalone packs. Now these would come out for 2 different events that would be around to celebrate the game. One is called the Fellowship event, and one was Gen Con, a very popular gaming convention. So twice a year, essentially, these packs would come out. And they don't contain any player cards, they're just quests. And not only are they quests, but they're some of the hardest quests in the game, full stop. Very, very difficult, very challenging, but also very exciting. And that's for people, generally, if you're going to go to one of these events, you're very, very excited about the game, you're really into it, and you're ready for that kind of a challenge. I should also note that in the standalone packs, there are a couple of packs in there that extend your campaign of the Saga play. So the Saga expansions tend to follow the events of the book, or really the movies, and the books, of course, but they do cut out certain things like, like the Old Forest and things like that, and the Fog and the Barrow Downs. Events that are only in the books and not in the movies. And so this is a way they've released those that you can play them in that, is to make a little bit of a longer campaign and get through almost all the events in the books. Although they do not have the Scouring of the Shire, unfortunately, we never quite got that. And the 4th way the game was released were Nightmare packs. Now, these are packs that you need the original pack in order to play. So you take the Nightmare pack for, let's say, Assault on Osgiliath, one of the adventure packs, and you take the adventure pack of Assault from Osgiliath, and then you will swap some cards out, you'll remove some cards, you'll add the Nightmare cards in, you'll mix it up, and now you have a very difficult scenario. And so you cannot play like an Assault on Osgiliath Nightmare pack without the original Assault on Osgiliath adventure pack. And the same thing goes for the deluxes, and the same thing goes for the Saga stuff. So almost everything that's available, it also has a Nightmare pack. Now they stopped the Nightmare packs, they stopped making them at some point, and so the last, I think, 3 cycles, they just never designed or developed any Nightmare packs for that. Now these are very hard to find, they're out of print. We'll get to that a little bit in a little while. But one of the things you might say, well, why it's such a challenge? One concept to understand about the game is that as the game goes on and more player cards and more heroes are added to the hero pool, you just have a lot more options and the quests get easier and easier. So if you were to play the game as it came out in order, and you were to play, the first cycle, Shadows of Mirkwood, you might find that to be very challenging. By the time you got to the 6th or 7th cycle and you have that full card pool, if you went back and played the first cycle, you would crush it. And that's just kind of the way the game goes. Now the game is very difficult, and I shouldn't say, if you're having trouble with it, I don't mean to, to make you feel bad, but generally it's a lot easier. And so these Nightmare packs were a way to bring those older quests up to the level that you could still find them challenging. So just to briefly sum up, you've got the 9 cycles, which have a deluxe box, and 6 adventure packs in each of those. You've got the Saga, which follows the Hobbit and the 3 books from the Lord of the Rings. Each of those has 2 boxes. Again, you could play all that stuff together and mix and match, play it singly or play through the campaign. You've got then Nightmare packs, which you can add to any of that content to bring them up to speed and make them much more difficult. And then you've got the standalone quests, which are like very difficult challenges that are one-off products, only quests. Okay, so that's basically the game. It was wonderful. It came to its end, done with this design. However, there have been some changes in the last year or two. So where do we stand in 2022? Okay, so they've done a few things to make the game easier to get into, and because stores were having trouble having it's a lot of SKUs. You get 100 different packs and boxes and things. So they've decided to make it a lot easier for people. So what they've done is they've done away with, here's the deluxe and 6 packs, and now they've made it into 2 boxes. So let's take the Angmar Awakened cycle, for example. So previously you would have had to have the Lost Realm Deluxe box and the 6 adventure packs. And that would be, each of those, as we said before, has player cards and the scenarios, the quests in them. Well, now they've put all that together and divided it into 2. And you have 2 boxes. So you can get the hero side, the player card side of the box for Angmar Awakened, and you can have the adventure packs, or the quests side of it. So this has become these 2 boxes, which is insanely simpler, okay? So now instead of having to hunt down all these single packs, you can now just buy these 2 boxes. Now they haven't done a lot of that, but they've gone ahead and done it with the Saga stuff as well. So where previously you would buy the 2 Fellowship boxes, now you will just buy 1 single Fellowship box, okay? And the same thing for the 2 Towers, etc., etc. So the game has become much more streamlined. Great news. That's very easy, you say. Well, it is. It's great. They've also done something a little bit else that mirrors some of their other games, which are the sister games in this line. If you're unaware, Arkham Horror, the card game, is another limited card game, as well as Marvel Champions. And they share designers. They share a lot of similar mechanisms. They're considered sister games, this sort of trilogy. Now, what the others have been doing is coming out with these single packs that you could just open up and play. And that's what they did. They came up with 4 different decks, which sort of, elves, dwarves, Gondor, Rohan. So you can just buy that pack, open it up, and it has some extra cards to switch out if you want to, but you can essentially just play, which is very nice. So that's one thing they've done to make it a little easier. They've also come out with a new enhanced core box, which has a little bit of a campaign in it. I should mention that as well. The new boxes contain little campaigns that are, so the story used to be just sort of loosely put together that didn't connect, but now you can play them in a connected fashion. If you already own that product, they do have ways you can just print that out so that you can play it with your existing product, which is another nice kind of thing. And then the new core box, as I say, has those 3 quests in there, and it has that little mini campaign. But they also came out with sort of a pack that has these 2 scenarios in there that act as a really good jumping off point and introduction for the game as well, and that's on the screen here as well. So those, and just as a little side note, those were included in the special limited edition 2-player starter set they put out a few years ago, which is just another product. I'm not really going to go too much into that. That was just a one-off that they did. But they're not going to be doing it anymore. It was like $100, and it came some other swag and things. It was kind of a collector's edition. Okay, so all is well in the world. Now you can just buy these cycles bundled up as 2 boxes instead of hunting down all these little packs and things. Well, I've got bad news for you. The problem is, if you look on the screen here before, I said there were 9 cycles, right? Well, they're not reprinting all of the cycles. They're only going to reprint the ones that are kind of fan favorites. Now, this was really the first game of its kind to come out. And because of that, the earlier cycles have a lot of growing pains. The earlier cycles have a lot of amazing stuff in there, but some of the quests and some of the things they had going on were problematic or didn't really work as well. And the game only got better as it went along. That's completely, like, you look at the design, how brilliantly they're designed later. But of course, they're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Their designs are coming from learning from previous designs. Okay, so you're not going to be able to buy all of those. And Fantasy Flight hasn't really released a list of what they're going to reprint or not. So this is where we stand, I guess. And that is, number one, you should definitely buy that the 2-pack starter set, the little quest to play against. They're a really great intro. That little story, it's very enjoyable quest, even for veteran players to play. One of them is, the other one's a little too easy. And then you should definitely buy these reprinted boxes. They're very easy to get and come out. But the other stuff is out of print, and you're going to have to, if you really want to play that, if you're really hardcore into doing that, you're going to have to chase down those other packs. And I'll give my thoughts on each of the cycles, whether I think they'll be reprinted or not, in just a moment here. But before I do that, I'll also mention the Nightmare packs. They're probably insanely expensive now. I haven't looked in a very long while, but they're very hard to find, and they're not reprinting those. So I think you might be out of luck there. So let's go through each of the cycles in turn, and then we'll talk a little bit about some other resources outside of Fantasy Flight, and we'll end the video there. So the first cycle is the Shadows over Mirkwood. Now, you already will have this, the first 3 quests from this box, if you have that, the core set. And the packs themselves, they're a mixed bag. Now, there are some very powerful, sought-after cards in there, of course. The game was just getting going, and the scenarios themselves, the quests themselves, there are some really interesting ideas. This kind of follows the idea of Aragorn going and finding Gollum during that 17 years that Gandalf had left the Shire and was trying to find out about the ring. The movies kind of compressed that into like a day or two, but in the books themselves, it was about 17 years. And this takes place when they're trying to find Gollum and they're trying to understand more about the ring and whether this is the Ring of Power. So you're kind of trying to find him. So the story is interesting. It has some really good player cards in there, but they're definitely one of the weaker sets, and I don't think that they're going to be reprinted at all. The next cycle up is the Dwarven cycle. And this deals with initially the dwarves and Durin's Bane and the Nameless Sphere, and you get a little bit of that in the deluxe box, and then the rest of it you deal with like the Watcher in the Water, and eventually you have to face off against the Balrog. Now this cycle is really, really good. It has some really amazing player cards in there, some really good heroes as well, but still kind of trying to find the footing of the game. And then you get, there's some swinginess. There's some bad quests in here. The Long Dark is like a pack that has, Glorfindel, who's a very, very powerful hero, like really good for your collection, but also the quest is one of the worst in the game. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. The decks in this era were very large, meaning they were a little bit inconsistent. You could play and have like a very easy quest or a very difficult quest, just kind of how much they went. There was also Rivendell quest, quite remember the name of. It's the second quest in this, Road to Rivendell, that's it. And it's got some cards in there, treacheries, that can just absolutely wreck your game and kill you basically instantly. So there were some mixed bags in here, although I do really enjoy this cycle. There's some really great quests in here. I think that Dwarf box, the Khazad-dûm box, is well worth a buy. There's some, I would still play some of those quests today. Next up is Against the Shadow. Now this, as far as a story, it follows a lot of stuff going on in Gondor and Ithilien. It's got, that initial box that came out, which was the Heirs of Numenor box, like when you first play it, it destroys you. It's got some very, very difficult quests, but some very rewarding quests as well. There's some of the, I think, they can be a bit swingy, but they're very exciting, and they're really fun to go back with a larger player card pool and play because they just provide a very good challenge. But this cycle depends, deals a lot. You get a lot more Gondor type cards. It develops the Ranger trait. You get some traps and things like that, and you also they do a lot of cards that synergize with the idea of playing a single sphere deck instead of going multi-sphere, and there's a lot of cards like that in there. Overall, I don't think they're going to repeat this cycle, although I did really enjoy it. There's, the ending, you fight going to Morgul, the Morgul Vale, and you fight Nazgul and stuff. So there's kind of a lot of exciting things. There's one of the most popular quests to play, both because it's easy, but also because it's very thematic and exciting, and that's Encounter Amon Din. You also have some quests like Druidine Forest that are like absolutely terrible, like just very difficult, but not in a fun way. Stewart's Fear, very exciting, one of my favorite quests actually. So this is a very good cycle. I think it's well worth picking up, and there's some really interesting cards here to help flesh out the deck. Again, still pretty early on in the cycle, but they're not going to, I would be very surprised if they reprinted this cycle. Next up is a Ringmaker cycle. Now this cycle really started developing the idea of a couple of big things happen in this cycle. One of them is the Sylvan trait, which is one of my favorite deck types to play, and there's a lot of support for that archetype in this series. You also get Galadriel as hero, very looked after hero, one of the most powerful heroes in the game, as she should be. Very, very fun as well. This cycle is a bit of a mixed bag for most people. I happen to really love it, but they introduced the time mechanism, and essentially that makes you go a little bit faster, forces you to move ahead a little bit faster so you can't turtle, which is a popular way at that time to play, which was to build up all your forces and then kind of crush the quest. And this time mechanism really made it very difficult to do that, change the way you play. But the downside of it is that it made the game much more complicated, much more fiddly for people. There's a lot of removing time counters from a lot of different cards, and it's a bit much to keep track of. I do think it's a very strong cycle. I really enjoy it, but I would be very surprised if they reprinted this one. I should also mention that this kind of takes place in Isengard and Dunland, and you fight a lot of the people there, and there's a bunch of Rohan support in this cycle as well. Next up is Angmar Awakened cycle. Now this is one that they have reprinted, so you can get this pretty readily, and I think that's a great one because this cycle is amazing. It deals a lot with Angmar, of course, which I love. That's where the Witch King is from, the Witch King of Angmar. And the quests here, they really start coming into their own. They had the designer that it really was doing half of the Arkham Horror, the card game. Before that, they did this, and they were doing a really great job. So this cycle itself, a lot of fascinating things going on, really solid quests, some really great support for their new Dunedain trait, which, the Dunedain, that's one of, Aragorn was a Dunedain. They don't really go into that too much in the films other than to say the word a couple times, but it's much more important in the books. They sort of protect the Shire. And they have the Blood of Numenor in them. And this is a very powerful archetype that can be a very risky archetype, but a very powerful one that involves keeping enemies engaged with you more and more and more, and you get bonuses based on that. And that's one of the big things to get fleshed out in this particular cycle. Again, some of the best quests in the game are in this cycle. Some of the most replayable quests are in this. The Dread Realm happens to be my favorite quest. Very difficult, but very cinematic. Really, really enjoyable. And this is, again, this one is easy to pick up, so we should probably move on to the next one, which is Dream Chaser cycle. Now, this is my favorite cycle. This is another one that's reprinted and available. This one is a little more complicated. I don't think that I would start with this cycle. Essentially, you are, you're piloting boats around. So there are some that are on some quests that are on land, and some quests that you deal with boats. You're on boats, and there's some of the most epic quests, like Storm on Copus Haven is amazing. It's this big naval battle, really, really exciting stuff. And this cycle gives support for the Noldor trait, which is a very powerful and interesting and thematic deck type. And so that's one of the major ones. In this game, they kind of tend to put elves. There's a lot of different elves in Middle Earth, but in this game, they sort of distill them down into just either you're a Sylvan or you're a Noldor. And sometimes that doesn't make sense in terms of the lore, but I think in the mechanisms of the game, it was kind of necessary to do that. So this is the Noldor support, which involves getting rid of cards and spending cards as resources. Very, very interesting there. Then comes the Haradrim cycle. We get side quests, which is a very fascinating new way to play the game, new addition to the game. These are some very fantastic quests in here, very well designed and very good. But this, in terms of the player cards side of it, these are a lot of cards that tend to be adding to other decks and things. So this is not a great one cycle to get for the player cards if you don't own a lot of the game, but it is really good as it gives support to a little bit from everything. So it's a really good cycle. I don't know if they'll reprint this one. I hope they do. We'll see. Then comes the Arid Mithrin cycle, which I think maybe has the best set of quests, the best designed, most interesting. You can really see that they've come into their own here, and a lot of interesting new archetypes. You get the Dale archetype, which is very, very powerful, involves equipping your allies with different weapons and items and things. It's arguably one of the most powerful kinds of decks to play, and it's super fun as well. And the quests in this set are very, very exciting. I really feel pretty strongly that they would reprint this one because it is so well done. And lastly, we have the Vengeance of Mordor cycle. This one thematically takes you into Mordor, which is really in the Lands of Rune, which is really, really awesome place to go. We get Saruman and some other really long sought after heroes. This particular cycle is very, very difficult. I mean, very difficult, and tests veteran players in different ways. Not just difficult for difficult sake, but provide very fascinating puzzles. It's really the coup de grace to the really great cap off of the whole series, I think, and you're getting a lot of those things that you have been looking for. They also feature contracts, which is a brand new way to card to add into your decks that just sits out, and this gives you some kind of restriction in the way that you can build your deck, but also gives you some kind of reward for doing so. And it's really rejuvenated players at that time. It really rejuvenated the entire game and gave you the ability to go back and play all kinds of cards that maybe you'd stopped playing with or didn't care about, and it was like mind-blowing when this came out. So it's very, very exciting, but it can be an interesting tool for a newer player, maybe a little overwhelming, and again, the quests are a little difficult. I would think they would probably reprint this one as well, although we'll see. Now, to close out the video, I did want to mention a couple of key things. Number one, if you're struggling with the deck construction part and you really love the game, well, there's a website called RingsDB, and that has thousands and thousands of decks on there that other players have loaded up and that you can go ahead and play. You can just print it out, look on your phone, put those decks together. You can cycle that. You can put it in search parameters and say, these are the products I own, and it will only show you decks that you can build. Of course, you can always find a deck you like, and if you have to proxy a couple of cards, just write on some other card from some other game and stick it in a card sleeve. You can always do that as well. I should also mention that there is a very big fan base for this game, a rabid fan base, and they some of them have gotten together to make what's called a long extended party. Now, this is a completely, it has nothing to do with Fantasy Flight. These are just people that were excited about the game, and they're designing new scenarios. Not only new scenarios, but new heroes, new player cards, new archetypes, and they've been putting a massive amount of effort in to continue the game, and they've got quite a lot of content. It's all free. Of course, you have to print it out yourself, and there is a small expense there. But yeah, that's another thing that's available to you if you enjoy that. There are other people who have home brewed scenarios and stuff like that, and you can find stuff like that on Board Game Geek, but this is a massive undertaking. Those are also, of course, quite a lot of work, but this is pretty much dwarfs that because of all the art and formatting and all that goes into that. And because this game is so loved and there's so many people that play it all over the world and it was going on for so long, there's a ton of blogs and there's a number of podcasts and things like that out there as well that can help you enjoy the game and understand the game a little bit better, or just give you something to listen to while you're driving around and getting excited about the game. That's one of the things I really like actually about this kind of a game, is that when you're not playing it, you can be thinking about it and making decks and things like that, like they call it the meta, and it kind of enhances your joy of the whole game in general. Well, I hope that video helped you to understand and get your head around how the game was released and how you can go about buying it, or to at least give you the tools to come up with a strategy of how you'll go forward with your own venture into Middle Earth. But for now, I gotta roll.